The politics of Reconstruction. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about some of the freedoms that African Americans gained during the Reconstruction period, and then discuss how Kate Brown Dodson fits into this. So in the aftermath of the Civil War, there were 4.2 million freed slaves, 600,000 casualties, and 250,000 people displaced throughout the South, mostly women and children. And so on the screen, you see a photograph of a paper-making mill in Richmond, Virginia, and you can see that the South is literally hollowed out. And so it's in this period that many activists are wondering, what kind of nation is the United States now? Who is a citizen? What will labor look like after slavery? And finally, on what terms should the South come back into the Union? In March 1865, Congress creates the Freedmen's Bureau, and this supervises and manages abandoned lands in the South. And one of the important things that the Freedmen's Bureau is able to do is that they adjudicate disputes between freed people and their white employers, so that freed people are able to stand up for their rights. And by December of 1865, states have ratified the 13th Amendment, which unequivocally ends the institution of slavery throughout the United States. And Congress also proposes something called a civil rights bill that would give full citizenship rights to all persons except Native Americans who are born on U.S. soil. Now, in terms of Native Americans, that's because Native Americans were not part of the American nation. They were citizens of their own tribes. And so that's an important distinction. And it gave people the ability to make and enforce contracts, sue in court, buy and sell property, and have equality under the law. But while Reconstruction was happening, a lot of people felt as though President Johnson, who succeeded Abraham Lincoln after he is assassinated, is not really making sure that the South knows that slavery is over. And so in the aftermath of the 13th Amendment, a lot of states pass black codes which restrict black labor. A lot of the same senators and representatives who had served in Congress before the Civil War are reelected and come back in. And so it doesn't feel as though a revolution has taken place. And that is very keenly felt in Memphis, Tennessee in 1866, when there is a horrible riot that occurs there. African Americans were gathering to celebrate freedom, and white police officers interrupted their celebration. And over the next 72 hours, the black community was completely razed. And in total, 48 African Americans were killed, 70 to 80 were wounded, 91 houses were burned to the ground, churches and schools were burned, and at least 5 black women were raped, and all of these women were married to men who had served in the Civil War. And so in the aftermath of the Memphis riot, Congress decides that they're going to take over Reconstruction. So presidential Reconstruction is over, and this ushers in an era of radical Reconstruction. And for the purposes of this class, I cannot get into the nuances of the Civil War and Reconstruction, but the history section has classes specifically devoted to this topic. And so the first Reconstruction Act divides the South into 5 military districts and calls on states to create new constitutional conventions that guarantee black voting rights and ratify the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment to the Constitution is one of the most transformative amendments. It gives anybody who's born in the United States birthright citizenship and the right of due process. And it is passed and ratified in July 1868. And finally, the 15th Amendment says that the right to vote cannot be abridged by race or religion, and this becomes law in 1869. So it's in this period that there is a tremendous flourishing of black rights. So in the era of Reconstruction, African Americans now have full citizenship rights in the United States. Black men can vote. African Americans are able to sue in court, to serve on juries. They have their civil rights protected by both the federal government and state governments. And so while these rights are really flourishing for African Americans, Kate and Jacob Dodson are experiencing troubles in their marriage. In 1865, Jacob Dodson becomes a very heavy drinker and loses his job in the Senate. And so as Jacob's earning abilities decline, she takes financial capabilities and responsibilities for the household. And so in 1867, Kate Brown sues for divorce. And this is not a decision to be taken lightly, because Kate Brown and her allies lived in a broader culture where reputation was taken seriously. Brown, after all, was central to African American uplift, and it was incredibly uncommon for elite and middle class women to get a divorce in the 1860s. And so many people from the government testified on Kate Dodson's behalf, and she was granted the divorce and was allowed to resume her maiden name, Catherine Brown. Only a few months after Kate Brown's divorce was finalized, she traveled across the Potomac River to visit a sick relative in Alexandria, Virginia. At the Washington Depot, she purchased a round-trip ticket to ride in the ladies' car and travel back to her hometown. Like the ladies' accommodations in the Senate, ladies' railroad cars were intended to shelter virtuous women from the corrupting public culture dominated by men. Train conductors often excluded Black women from the ladies' car, which means that they did not qualify as ladies. And so when Kate Brown boarded the ladies' car, the conductor refused to allow her to stay there. And so two men had to drag her off the platform. This seriously injured Brown. Aided by prominent Republican friends, she sued the railroad for $20,000. The train, a lower court ruled in her favor, but the U.S. Supreme Court, which serves as the appellate court for the District of Columbia, rested its opinion on narrow grounds, ruling that railroads did not provide enough equality in its treatment of African Americans. And so she was one of the many Black women of this era who used the courts to protest discrimination on the railroads, streetcars, and steamboats. And so in her petition, Kate Brown says, quote, "I declare they could not have treated a dog worse than they treated me." So the period of Reconstruction was a sea change in the lives of formerly enslaved men and women, whether it was through voting, office holding, or family life. The story of Kate Brown reveals the ways that African American women and men seized on the moment of freedom to wage political campaigns and enjoy the fruits of Reconstruction.